What's the scariest conspiracy theory you've heard? Story 1. Plants cultivate humans for carbon dioxide. To be fair, that's what domesticate means, literally, to give a home. Plants have used us for 10,000 years to spread around the world, and have forced us to depend on them, and only them. The entire human population depends on at least one of 5 different cereal plants for survival. Except they haven't. Plants existed long before humanity, and they covered the earth long before animals did. They don't need us at all. Plants respire at night, meaning they release about half of the carbon they take from the air during the day. The Earth has more than enough sources of carbon dioxide to keep the balance. Plants also haven't made us do anything. I heard somebody talking about how agriculture transformed the world and humanity so completely that you could make a pretty convincing argument for the fact that the dominant species on the planet is wheat. It took hunter-gatherers and got them to focus almost completely on the proliferation of wheat. Civilizations formed around the care for and spreading of the wheat. Story 2. Those Facebook memes of posting a current selfie and a photo of you taken 10 years ago are to program facial recognition software. The slightly newer stuff can identify you from orbit through clouds, based solely on the top, using the bird's eye view of your head and shoulders. They don't even need to see your face. If you've gone outside in the last 10 years, guarantee you have a profile on file. In the same vein, TikTok dances are most definitely being used to program AI to recognize the various hinge points and other motion-related aspects of the body, so that they can more naturally mimic motion on any simulated body type. I will forever thank my father for putting the fear of God into me when it came to posting my face online at 16. I did it once on my art page on the now-dead Elfwood around 2002-ish. My parents were divorced. My dad, who's not a phone guy, called out of nowhere to tell me to take down my profile picture. I guess he checked up on me if a weekend was skipped. He went into this whole lecture. I thought it was ridiculous, but I took it down to make him happy. He kinda predicted this day would come once he played around with Photoshop for the first time. Smart man. Programmer back in the day. The lecture stuck. Never uploaded my face online, and my friends and family know not to post my pictures on their Facebook. I never had Facebook. Story 3. That there is no such thing as food-safe plastic. From what I've read, I am very much not an expert. There is so much we don't know about how the chemical makeup of different plastics affects the human body. I guess I kind of lead towards the, yeah, it's probably killing us all, but I can't afford to do better lifestyle. The other side of this is that the plastics dramatically improve food safety. They enable us to transport farther, store longer, and reduce diseases caused by handling so much, so that it's probable even with their problems they're still saving more lives than they're taking. It also drastically elongates the life of food as well and serves to massively reduce food wastage. Rotting feet sitting in a landfill is a massive contributor to global greenhouse gases. The single-use plastic wrap wrapped around a cucumber most people would not describe as an environmentally friendly food storage option, but in reality, fresh cucumber with no plastic might last 1 week max out of cold storage. You might double that or more with a plastic-wrapped cucumber. There absolutely is food-safe plastic, but it's obviously limited to a certain time frame due to overall product characteristics and storing conditions. All materials break down eventually, both chemically and mechanically. When trying to find the right polymer compounds, a lot of aspects have to be considered. How does temperature or exposure to light impact the packaging and the food? What happens during long-term storage, especially if not recommended conditions or constantly changing conditions? What happens when the packaging is opened? How may contact with oxygen impact foods, and how might that impact how packaging behaves over time? All safety measures are temporary. Hence, certain products with expiration dates despite not going bad for a long time. The issue is with the increased probability of packaging breaking down one way or another, contaminating the food eventually. For example, water in PET should not go bad, but the PET does. Food safety is ensured within a certain set of parameters, with an error margin, such as temperature and radiation exposure. UV being an issue for most things, storing PET in bright locations with direct sunlight will speed up chemical breakdown. If it is a hot environment, even more. Then again, extremely low temperatures will also impact material characteristics. Repeat cooling and heating cycles are detrimental as well. So, PET until expiration is food safe if recommended storing conditions are met, because material stability respectively inertness are guaranteed, in theory. But the problem goes beyond that. Companies will purchase low-quality material, sometimes with impurities, further reducing the time frame of temporary food safety. Companies will also ignore safety concerns due to the chemical makeup of their foods, using packaging materials that are not adequate. Companies will also disregard suggested storage requirements, using a combination of materials in foods that aren't recommended. And lastly, consumers are not aware of how they should store their food properly, so they ensure food safety. Overall, any plastic material brings so many issues to the table and requires so much oversight and education that it really outweighs the benefits. We really should consider switching to glass, even better with a deposit system. Next time you are in a hospital, think of what your experience would be like without single-use plastics. Here, let me use this reusable metal syringe on you, like I'm still in Frankenstein's lab. Thanks, but no thanks. You have no idea the amount of infection prevention that plastics enable in just one industry, or how much testing goes on in food-grade and medical-grade products before they launch. It's about 5 years in medical applications. In food applications, 100,000 people used to die annually from botulism before BPA plastic food can liners existed in canned goods. Story 4. This is a regional one, but the idea is that Robert Pickton, the pig farm serial killer, didn't act alone. The theory goes that the farm was a common party spot for the Vancouver Police Department and Hells Angels, and that was the reason he got away with it for as long as he did. Recently, he died in jail, and the families of his victims are furious he was not able to testify. There were also a lot of sketchy things to do with evidence. When you start looking, it's pretty convincing. Pickton's brother still works in construction out here and has his own excavation crew. Openly makes jokes about hiding bodies. Really wouldn't surprise me if he played a part and just played dumb for the trial. Yes, the farm was a party spot and had a private bar on site, the Piggy Palace. Hells Angels and cops from VPD hung out there, among others. His brother, David Pickton, is a piece of shit and probably involved. In fact, he killed a kid drunk driving when he was young, and the Pickton's mom, when David told her about it, went and moved the kid's body off the road and dumped it in the woods so that no one would find it. They did, and nothing serious even came of it. There was a revolving door of low-life working and living on the farm. Vancouver Police Department gave zero clues about any of the victims and didn't investigate until they were forced to form media and public pressure. VPD were as much to blame as Pickton, considering how many warnings they had about him, one of which was a victim who got away by knife-fighting Pickton years before he was finally stopped for good. RCMP and VPD are both useless. The Criminal Minds two-part episode To Hell and Back, which was tightly inspired, minus the erasure of the many of the real victims being native, by these murders, was the most terrifying piece of television I ever saw as a young adult woman. It was so gory. To this day, pigs' sharp teeth give me major creeps. Something like this happened when I lived in South Australia. Look up the family murders, horrific serial killings in the 70s and 80s in which a group of gay men were abducting young men and sexually torturing them until they died. Multiple of the 5 victims died of massive blood loss from anal trauma. Only one person was ever sent to prison, one of the 2 ringleaders, and he only went away for one of the murders, though it's well accepted that he was heavily involved in all of them. The identity of the second ringleader is actually well known via word of mouth, but the media are not allowed to publish his name due to a suppression order that has been heavily criticized. The police weren't able to get anything to stick, so he's never faced a single day in prison for some of the most horrific and sadistic crimes. In fact, he runs an antique clock shop on one of the main roads near the city. It's so creepy to think about how there is a sadistic murderer free to walk the streets in Adelaide. Story 5. Dark Forest Theory. We can't find any evidence of extraterrestrial life because the smart ones are hiding, and the dumb ones have been killed by something else. The far more obvious reason is that life is rare and far away. If the nearest life is in the Andromeda galaxy, they won't see that humans left the planet for over 2.5 million years. Then it will take another 2.5 million years for a message from them to reach Earth. And then it will take like 5 billion years for any spacecraft they send to reach us. I have a possible solution to the Fermi paradox that overlaps a little with the dark forest hypothesis, but I personally feel that it has specific ideas that differentiate it to warrant it being its own thing. I tried to do some research on any other hypothesis having the same idea, and I didn't immediately find anything. I call the possible answer the free puppies hypothesis. The dark forest hypothesis states that civilizations are radio silent to keep from broadcasting their locations to more advanced and possibly hostile civilizations. Where the free puppies hypothesis is different is that not only do these civilizations stay quiet, but they have actually received our transmissions and hardware like Voyager 1. They have triangulated our location, if not flat out used the map of our location that we put on Voyager 1, but no civilization is going to respond to that any more than the average person would follow a guy to an unmarked white van in a back alley lured in by the promise of free puppies. The hypothesis states that not only do civilizations ignore us, but they actively avoid us, being that it's safer to believe that our civilization is predatory than it is that it is young and naive enough to broadcast its location and home address. As all solutions to the Fermi paradox, I have zero evidence to back this up, and I just think that this is an interesting addition to a thought experiment that people much smarter than me have been thinking about for generations. I think we can't find evidence of extraterrestrial life because we generally think of life in Earth's terms. Like there could be a fully populated planet on Jupiter, but it's so wildly different from Earth we never pick up on it. Obviously, there are people who study this type of thing and do think about it, but in general, it seems like people are thinking of extraterrestrial life in the framework of Earth. Nah, the distances are just too big, that's it. It's that simple. In 2.5 million years, the nearest large galaxy will receive the first images of humans leaving Earth. In 5 million years, any message they send will arrive back on Earth. In 5 billion years, maybe a spacecraft from them will reach Earth, assuming they perfectly calculated Earth's movement path 5 billion years ahead. So, there is a much simpler explanation behind the Fermi paradox. Faster than light communication is not possible and never will be. If you recognize that the distance of even a dozen light years makes EM spectra communication impossible, or at least not possible with a usable bandwidth, the universe could be teeming with intelligent life that just can't talk to anyone else. If you want to feel a little bit better about this one, on the flip side, it's quite possible that belligerent aliens leave us alone for the sole reason that we are crazy enough to broadcast our transmissions into space. They would have no way of knowing the purpose of our transmissions, and the first ones that they would receive could be from World War II and the start of the Cold War. Imagine receiving the first messages from an alien civilization and it's just atomic weapons testing. That's what they would get. We might be the poison dart frog equivalent of a civilization. Story 6. The current social wars were designed to distract us from the trillions of dollars that went from the middle class to the wealthy. It will continue to happen while people fight over body parts and bedroom activities. The people almost broke through with Occupy Wall Street, but the PTB continues to divide people to make sure it can't happen again. Dave Smith says it best, but to paraphrase, we had Occupy Wall Street and the Tea Party, left-wing and right-wing respectively, both happening around the same time with a similar unifying message that the big banks and government were absolutely wrecking the middle class. Then, all of a sudden, every major corporation started making social causes a cornerstone of their branding, while right-wing politicians pushed back on all those causes, making national conversations with a heaping dose of identity politics. They gave us something else to fight about that doesn't cost them any money. If you can convince the lowest white man he's better than the best colored man, he won't notice you're picking his pocket. Hell, give him somebody to look down on and he'll empty his pockets for you, LBJ. Jamestown had revolts all the time until they put a racial caste system into the legal system. Meanwhile, the French Revolution systematically decapitated the French aristocracy because the entire middle and lower classes were united against the aristocrats and royalty. They know if we were ever united again with this level of fleecing going on, no bunker would protect them. Occupy Wall Street was an absolute failure. The staff in the buildings were looking down on them and laughing. Literally, they only needed to unite and do two things: push everyone to bank and credit unions and get people to invest locally instead of on Wall Street. On Point gives me almost $500 each month for free in premium interest savings. You don't get people to do these things by banging drums on Wall Street. You organize smartly and communicate by showing people the facts that credit unions are better than too big to fail banks. Wells Fargo practically does the work for you, and that you'll get roughly the same payout if you invest close to home, around 7%. The point was to pull the cash pile away from them to your general area where you have far more control over it. I mean, that's obviously not really a conspiracy. Same with back to office and hell inflation, it's to control us. To depend on a crappy job with crappy conditions, we were getting too rich and too comfortable thinking about part-time work and then having time to observe and think about all the obvious crap they do to control us. Like, we laugh at Russian state propaganda, and it's true, and it is propaganda, but we sit on the high horse and think we are better and immune to it. Western media is way ahead. Much more subtle manipulation. I've always found it odd that politicians on both sides steer clear of real issues, rather than focusing on the hot-button issues. This is a very powerful disenfranchisement tool. The radical base of each party will be supportive no matter what, but the vast majority of people truly couldn't care less about these radioactive topics, so they get disconnected from politics altogether. I mean, honestly, do you mean to tell me that the vast majority of people are more worried about illegal immigration and abortion rather than corruption, government spending, and things like solving the opioid epidemic? Story 7. NASA was behind the moon landing. I work with elementary schoolers. A 5th grader asked me if I thought we went to the moon. I said, "What do you mean?" And he told me to Google the boot prints. Apparently there's a photo of boot prints on the moon and they don't match the suit on display in the Smithsonian or something. NASA tried to fake the moon landings. They even hired Stanley Kubrick to direct it and smuggled him into the studio in secret, but he was problematic. He was such a perfectionist and was so unsatisfied with the footage that they were getting that he insisted they shoot it on site. Story 8. The food that we have been eating in the United States is a huge part of the mental illness going on today. I'm more inclined to blame lifestyle than food. Something like 70% of this country gets less than the bare minimum amount of physical activity and probably spends very little time outside. We didn't evolve to sit on our asses under artificial light all day. There's also the fact that most people don't have a sense of community anymore because neoliberalism has atomized us into individual consumers and turned most third places into user pay models that try to get people in and out as quickly as possible. I'm glad to see this is getting talked about more often. I think it's important. I know a bunch of people roughly my age, 30-ish, who talk about how much they miss college, and when they explain their reasoning, it's all stuff built around third places. Especially at schools with a walkable campus next to a walkable town. The campus and town are essentially one giant third space aligned towards the needs of students. It's probably contributory, but I think the larger part is that every business in the first world wants to overwork their employees, pay them as little as possible while raising prices as much as possible. And it's not sustainable, never has been, and the things that have historically allowed people to cope are also getting more expensive and out of reach. Well, it's definitely a factor in obesity. A friend of mine worked in Brazil for a year and lost so much weight. He said at first he thought there was something wrong with him, but realized it was his diet. See, there was an outdoor market on his way back home from work, and that's where he ate all the time. Not for health purposes, but just because it was convenient. Fresh fruit, fresh vegetables, fresh meat. While the American diet is carbs, sugars, and salt, everything we eat is loaded with salt and frozen, so it can last for months in a grocery store freezer. We eat tons of bread, and even the bread is loaded with so much sugar it's practically cake. Of course, eating better leads to weight loss, but the difference is what foods are most affordable and convenient to buy. Over there, the very unhealthy foods are expensive and inconvenient, but here it's pretty well the norm. Story 9. A small one. Samsung announced that the Galaxy Watch 4 would include a non-invasive continuous glucose monitor, which would allow you to monitor your blood sugar at any time while you wear it, for as long as you own it. A few months before the 4 was released, that feature quietly disappeared from all of the marketing without explanation, and now, years later, is nowhere to be found. I believe Abbott Laboratories, makers of the Freestyle Light Glucometer and the Freestyle Libre continuous glucose monitor systems, panicked, fearing that a non-expiring, non-invasive glucose monitor would be hugely popular among diabetics, and devastate their death grip on the market, paid a huge bribe to Samsung to drop the whole thing. Things like the continuous glucose reading feature are often dropped because the FDA gets involved. If it's performing a medical function, it needs to have FDA approval to be a medical device, which carries a lot of requirements to get the rubber stamp. So, likely the FDA contacted Samsung and say, hey, if you're going to sell that as is, it needs XYZ and it needs to be considered a medical device, and Samsung didn't want to pay the extra cost to make it happen. There's a valid concern that diabetics would rely on a smartwatch instead of a more expensive device, but unless the smartwatch got the same testing, it's nowhere near as reliable and possibly dangerously inaccurate. Along these lines, I believe a cure for type 1 diabetes will never happen because so much money is made off of diabetics having to manage their condition. The one big caveat is that they don't know how to solve the autoimmune portion of T1D, i.e., they can replace damaged pancreas cells but can't keep the body from attacking them all over again. But even if that was possible, it would get torpedoed through regulatory back channels. I think this is probably true of a lot of diseases with high perpetual maintenance costs of those affected. Is there really that much money to be made from people where the best treatment is just taking care of yourself? My wife has type 1, she eats healthy and exercises. The most she has to do is occasionally check her sugar levels if she feels herself crashing. For someone to keep a cure from coming on the market, they would have also need to stop universities and public health institutions from doing research into it. And then it's not just a matter of stopping progress with one regulatory agency like the FDA, you'd have to do that in multiple countries. But if you come up with a cure and get it patented, you have exclusivity for 5, where you could charge as much as the market is willing to accept by being the only supplier. Is there anything in T1D treatment that doesn't have a generic option? I'm genuinely asking because I don't know, and then that's only if you're already in the business of treating it. There's always going to be someone on the outside saying, I want a piece of that pie, and the best way to do that is to offer something no one else does. So, just for clarity, I am also a type 1 diabetic. According to this report, Americans spent $22 billion on insulin alone in 2022. Thanks to changing regulations and insurance for those fortunate to have it, costs to patients are coming down somewhat, but even if a patient's copay is only $120 for a 3-month supply, the manufacturers still get more than that. The closest thing to a generic for insulin is older formulas that may still work but aren't the best standard of care. There is not really a like-for-like generic such as Advil to ibuprofen. Every type 1 diabetic has to inject insulin every single day, so there is no escaping the cost mentioned above. Some folks, like myself, inject using needles or pens, but pumps are much more widespread. Those accounted for another $5.5 billion in 2022 and over $13 billion in 2023. Beyond this, there are testing supplies, test strips, and/or glucose monitors, which is another large chunk. Your point about there being no single regulatory body is valid, but the complexity of the problem combined with 3 companies making 90% of the insulin means it would be much easier for them to affect the institutions that would lead to a cure. For example, a large American drug maker almost certainly has connections to the government via lobbying efforts and has connections to research universities via donations and endowments. These connections are admittedly loose, but that's why it's a conspiracy theory. Story 10. That the public school system sucks because it was deliberately designed to fail the kids, forcing them to shuffle off to the factories once their dreams are crushed at graduation. Actually, the school system is quite literally based on a German/Prussian educational theory to create obedient humans who will work in factories, hence the name kindergarten for the start of the program. The system emphasizes sitting at your station, desk, quietly and waiting for work to be assigned to you. You complete the task, are told you did good, and wait for the next task without talking to your neighbor or leaving your station. There's a bell, just like in a factory, that rings to tell you when your break is. and there are designated eating and playing areas that you all shuffle off to. The day is as close as they can get to a typical 8-hour shift as well. By making this seem normal, you indoctrinate children into a system that they don't understand and aren't yet in a mental state to defend themselves against. Watch the bell ring at the end of recess. The children will drop their toys and run like dogs back to the classroom. I have worked as a teacher in several public schools and can assure you that this is not the case by any stretch of the imagination. My coworkers and I are completely dedicated to providing students with the tools to make it in a difficult world. Having good social skills, being punctual, the ability to work hard and follow directions, these are things that have been mentioned in this thread as proof that schools are teaching students to fit into a box. Aren't they also necessary skills that allow individuals to be more successful in their lives? I'm tired of hearing this because it is clear that people who mention it have no idea what they're talking about. It's modern class warfare. The wealthy elite are pushing policies designed to recreate echelons of education similar to how they were decades and centuries ago. They want quality education to be reserved for the upper class so that the best jobs are essentially reserved for their class. They want the lower class to receive a basic education that gives minimal preparation for joining the military and doing low-wage labor, ensuring a healthy supply of low-wage human resources that keeps wages depressed. Story 11. Hot dogs and buns come in different numbers on purpose. I got you on this one. Hot dogs are sold by the pound. Most meat is. You might get 10 hot dogs, but combined they weigh a pound. There might be a pack of 8 dogs that are thicker, but it's still 1 pound. Check next time you're at the store. The buns are made by a different company. Back in the day, they decided to put 4 buns in a tray. They could have picked 3. They could have picked 5. They chose 4. Then they bought a ton of trays and ovens that could hold many of those trays. Next thing you know, to get new ovens, new bakery lines, new trays, it just isn't happening. I don't believe this was intentionally done though. This goes back to when mass production started being a thing. Used to be you go to the butcher shop, ask for 4 hot dogs or 5, who cares? Then you go to the bakery and buy 4 or 5 buns. Once they started packing things and sending them to the grocery store, the butchers put a pound in their package, the bakers 2 trays or 8 buns. To your point, they could fix this issue and choose not to. It would cost money, and we know how companies feel about that, but I don't believe it was originally planned that way. Source: we had a stupid project in a college-level econ class. I picked this, Googled it, and sent an email to someone at Oscar Mayer. Didn't hear back and threw some crap together for the project. Then a few months later, someone from Oscar Mayer called me back. Story 12. That the South Korean prosecution office bullies people into committing suicide. Don't know if it's the scariest, but considering the current president openly admitted this, and if they don't succeed, then they can always drown over 300 children in the sea as they did with the Seoul ship. I just want to mention it because I want it to be mentioned. The Korean president covered everything and prevented professional rescuers from saving children because it would show how incompetent those in charge were. In short, during the accident, the captain of the Seoul ship escaped from the ship very quickly and left the children to die. Everyone who came to the rescue couldn't do anything. A few helicopters saved a few people, that's all. Then a third-party rescuer volunteered and came with his own equipment, which was a lot better than what the government sent, with his people who were experienced professionals. But the Coast Guard stopped them and prevented them from saving the children. Later, the government lied about the person who volunteered to help. They tried to cover up their failure. Story 13. Here's a new one. Spontaneous life is actually extremely common in the universe. We talk about the primordial ooze, where the first proteins formed into a cell and all that, but this theory states that life actually spontaneously arises on a microscopic level constantly. Well, constantly on a universal timescale, at least. Not all of it is carbon-based, and in fact, life has formed in many different ways that we don't recognize as true life. However, there is one critical thing that acts as a gateway: reproduction. Almost all life that is spontaneously created lives a short time and dies without reproducing. In our world, there have been 2 instances of spontaneous life that were able to reproduce. The precursor that leads to all life as we know it on Earth over millions and millions of years, and viruses. I think this is true because we aren't made of some rare elements that no one can explain. We're composed of elements that are plentiful in the universe. there has to be life out there. There have to be worlds with civilizations who came and went, along with their planets, millions of years ago. And their stories are forever lost to the universe. There will come a time in the future when we were a planet that existed billions of years ago, with new planets and life forms who will never know that we existed. Exactly. All the heavy elements, like carbon and iron, are formed inside stars and get scattered when they explode. So you need one generation of stars to make those elements, and they have lifespans of like 5 to 10 billion years, and then our solar system formed from those remnants and is like 4.5 billion years old. Add the two together and you get roughly the age of the universe. So basically our solar system is among the earliest in the entire universe to have the quantity of heavy elements needed for life. It took like 4 billion years after that to have intelligent life here. Could some other solar system do it faster? Maybe. But it's quite likely that for thousands of light years around our solar system, where we might be able to observe something, we're the first. Well, isn't that just the thing? The self-replicating nature of life makes it instantly subject to evolutionary pressures. Technically, it needs to have a variation within a population, or its kids, but still, with randomly assembled things like this, theory says that's harder to avoid than to get. So these replicating things should instantly start getting better. But the two things you listed are different. Viruses don't reproduce on their own all the time, and there's much debate as to their status as a living because of this, and a few other things. The precursors can kind of self-replicate, like with RNA world theories and stuff, but may not be considered classically alive because the definitions of growth and metabolism at this level are harder to get. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that the definition of life kinda includes reproduction as one of its tenets. Otherwise, it's just a cool piece of perhaps organic, natural machinery. Like a tornado moves and grows and wanes and sucks things up into the funnel, it's not alive. It's just a phenomenon that arises from the world around it. The environment working to resolve itself. Two magnificent birds of a feather. Anyway, our definition of life is pretty arbitrary and has undergone changes over the years as well. I mean, we wouldn't say that a mule isn't alive, or that it's nothing more than an amalgamation of living organisms, simply because it's incapable of reproduction. There are a lot of parasites that require a host in order to reproduce, so viruses doing the same shouldn't inherently preclude them from life status. That's kind of the point at its core. This is a thought experiment for us to ask ourselves how we define life, and if it's possible that our definition is only colored by our perceptions. It sounds like a joke, but it's a throwaway line used for a joke. But there's an episode of Lower Decks that hilariously touches on this and then ignores it. The setup is that there are researchers on a planet breaking apart some rocks, but the rocks are actually a silicone-based life form. They rise up and fight back, and Starfleet is called in to broker peace between the two. During the peace discussions, there is the following exchange. Researcher: we didn't know the rocks that we were studying had any silicate life. Rock person: ha! What you call silicate life, we just call life. You do not seem alive to us. Minding the mind's minds. Great episode. Lesbians, snakeborgs, white people failing to dunk, killer Klingon clowns from outer space, werewolf and organs, yet another magnificent bird who loves food-based puns. Absolute 10 out of 10 episode. It's a throwaway joke, played for laughs, but that belies the actual profoundness of the statement derived from a question that exobiologists, holy crap, they actually exist as a theoretical science profession, and space-minded philosophers have been asking for years. Would we even recognize alien life when we came across it? That's the real core of the theory and what drives it into conspiracy theory territory. That it's possible there are people who know about this and see it regularly but either shut up because it's scary and hard to understand, see some of the comments, or because they don't recognize it themselves. Thanks for watching until the end. If you have a similar story to these that you want to share with us, please leave it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave us a like and subscribe. For more videos like this one right now, please stop by our channel. Thanks again, and see you next time.